The final day of the Hearthstone Grandmasters playoffs for the inaugural season continues as we have the second semifinal, Hunterace versus Seiko. This is a match that's been fated since the beginning of 2018, and we have the pleasure of being able to find out who is going to join Fino in the grand finale and get that coveted global final spot. My name is Frodan, joined by Sottle. In the past few days, we've been combining the Europe and America's Grandmasters casting team, and it's been a wonderful pleasure to be able to dip back into Europe and just see all kinds of really interesting stories culminate into this one. This one's probably my most anticipated match so far in Grandmasters, period, and it's a pleasure to be able to join you guys.
Yeah, it's a fantastic little story we've got going between the two of them because there's a phenomenal amount of respect between the two players, first and foremost. Seiko even mentioned that early on he was very nervous going up against Hunterace for the first time because, in his words, he was now playing against a pro in the Grandmasters division, which is a little bit of shade at everyone else in the division, but, you know, mostly goes to speak for the level of respect that he has for Hunterace. But I think when you look at this top four as we had as a whole, I think Admirable set it up perfectly. Like, how could you be upset with any result out of these four players that we have? Like, they both have their own merit, and no one here wants to use the word deserve because all four of these players would deserve a spot, but we need to play out the competition. That's what we're going to let decide it. It's not about who deserves it more, it's about who can get it done when it comes down to the clutch.
Yeah, I guess the better way to phrase it is that no matter the result, you'd be happy for the person that was successful, and you also be a little heartbroken for the person that didn't make it, because you understand that both of these players, Hunterace and Seiko, have such a strong legacy going into it. I think everyone's eyes are on Hunterace primarily, coming into Grandmaster Season 1 as the reigning Hearthstone World Champion just a few months ago in Taiwan. And then, you know, can he be able to keep that momentum? Can he shift to specialist format when everyone else had been practicing while this guy was grinding out the Conquest best of 5 still? And I think a lot of those questions have been answered. He just needed a little bit of a transition period.
Yes.
I mean, you've even heard Casper talk to us and maybe even on interviews that he wasn't sure how to even approach specialist the format at the beginning. He said, you know what, I'm not sure how to really approach this. Maybe I'm not even that good at it. Maybe specialist as format has its weaknesses. And then as time goes on, oh, guess what? He's winning nonstop again.
Yeah, indeed. But we can see after 8 weeks of practice how he has ended up approaching it. So we can take a look at the deck list that he's brought now. And it's going to be a very familiar matchup for those of you that have followed the recent weeks of Hearthstone Grandmasters. Hunterace is going to be leading us out on this mage. He does have that same anti-rogue specific tech that I think Admirable broke down very well in the previous series. I kind of agree with him on his stance. This 2-card sideboard to a tertiary deck just doesn't really feel like it's worth a slot for me. I feel like you can carry some of that over into your primary and have a more dedicated tertiary deck for a different matchup instead. But regardless, two of the most successful players, Fino and Hunterace, have gone with that strategy, so that probably speaks for itself somewhat.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the one-of's halftime scavenger in the primary deck lists for the mage, largely just as a Swiss Army knife, right? You can use it as a pressure tool or to just something to develop on 4, as an opportunity to use Conjurer's Calling, or maybe even just as an anti-aggro option. And it seems like Hunterace, of course, favoring more of that consistency with Sandbinder instead. However, you can't really fault him on that. It seems like it's been working out fairly well. And, you know, the ultimate thing that comes down is whether or not Seiko's deck can execute its game plan very efficiently, because I feel like the rogue decks have been faltering a little bit despite having a lot of the good tools that they normally have in this matchup.
Yeah, and it's been very, very consistent in terms of what you bring as a secondary deck to deal with Mage. There's been a little bit of conflict here and there between particular one-offs, the exact amount of betrayals that you bring in. Seiko, one of the few players that's doing things a little bit differently. No Eviscerate in his main deck, which we have seen from several players. There's been a lot of kind of floating one-offs around that 2-drop slot, the Novice Engineers, the Sap, the Eviscerates, and so on. He is choosing just to bring an Eviscerate into his secondary deck to deal with Mage, specifically then with the standard stuff that we usually see, Walk the Plank, Fairy Dragon, and Betrayal to back all that up.
Yep, it'd be very ironic that Seiko would use what is many called the Water Rogue to defeat Hunterace, who was one of the players that were trying to push this specific variation of Rogue to the forefront of the metagame. But let's go ahead and jump into the first game, Hunterace versus Seiko. Only one player can get through and play a best of 5 for all the marbles, as earlier today, if you missed it, in the Asia Pacific region, Surrender getting his second ticket to a World Championship later this year at BlizzCon. And we'll see whether or not Hunterace and Seiko can join him.
I would be very excited to see Hunterace taking on Fino in a Mage Mirror, because for me, they are the top 2 players with that deck in terms of what I've watched and in terms of who I've learned the most from. I think Fino, perhaps more of a specialist just in terms of the number of games he... All right, are you going to do that every time, Dan? Come on. All right,
are you going to do that every time?
Yes, this is kind of my gimmick.
Then we are in agreement.
All right, fine. Hunterace, kind of a specialist in terms... sorry, Fino kind of a specialist. Oh, my God. In terms of mage play and the amount of games that he's grind out with it, Hunterace, I think, you know, when he puts a decent amount of time into any deck, he is just one of the best players in the world. So then by association becomes one of the best players with that deck. So I would love to see a super high-level mage mirror between the 2 of them, but that's not to take anything away from Seiko whatsoever.
Well, Seiko with a coin into the Snip Snap. This is a card that he just wants to use to fight for that early game board control, even though a lot of players have been saving it for later high game impact. And I think this is a nod to the fact that there's a lot of early game threats from the Mage that if you don't deal with early can be problematic. One of them is, in fact, the card that Hunterace drew, which is Stargazer Luna. How many times have we seen that card absolutely decimate, you know, the Rogue's chance of coming back in the game because it's a 2/4 that can't get dealt with and it draws too many cards?
Once in the very first series, the preceding series before this, Fino rode his way to the spot that both of these players are trying to get into off the back of that early Stargazer Luna in one of the games. But Hunterace here, probably slightly more concerned with just relieving a bit of pressure for now because it has been quite an aggressive start for Seiko. I actually kind of want to change my mind on a whim here because I kind of called out the double halftime scavenger tertiary deck that Hunterace has. The way he's done it, I actually do kind of like because he is doing the kind of thing I talk about where he's leaning the primary deck kind of towards that Rogue matchup because he has 2 copies of Frostbolt in it to begin with.
That's true.
Which Fino doesn't. So then when he chooses to like fully tech for Rogue, it's not a matter of like, oh, there's only 2 cards that he needs to bring in. It's just saying, well, I've already got the 2 Frostbolts, so these halftime scavengers are all I need to complete the package.
Yeah, and also, of course, it's useful to even burn your opponent down, which a lot of times this Mage struggles with to get over that final hurdle in order to close out the game. Although it doesn't seem like Hunterace is in the position to do that exactly.
No.
Looks like he is on cleanup duty, but he does have 2 Sorcerer's Apprentice. Doesn't necessarily need both of them right now. Gonna go digging with the Magic Trick. Finds decent utility cards, but nothing that impacts the board right now outside the Conjurer's Calling, which he already has.
Right. Magic Trick, like, it might surprise people like how unlikely you are to find something specific. TJ and Admirable were talking about like the total number of mage cards, which I believe is in the 50s. It's like 54 or something. But 20 of those are spells that cost 3 or less that you can find off Magic Trick. So actually, you're only something like 15% to find a specific out of Magic Trick. It feels like it should be a lot higher than that. But you saw Hunterace react to kind of what was just a bad collection of cards in that spot in terms of the kind of thing he was looking for. Which, you know, it can happen. It's a low chance to find, you know, specific outs. That, on the other hand,
those 3 options were much better on
yes.
average. I mean, mainly because Blizzard, of course, a way to deal with a wide board and even freeze it. Coincidentally, Seiko's board would not die, which is to Hunterace's benefit if he wants to play Sea Giant even. So this is a really interesting dynamic, and I actually kind of hone in on that a little bit more because we do have a couple of power spikes in both players' hands, but board development and how many minions that exist on the board afterwards is going to be something that Seiko should focus on because he has that Sea Giant, but he also has other 3-mana plays available to him this turn as well.
For sure. We've seen this over the last couple of weeks. We've seen a lot of Rogue versus Mage, as I mentioned, and we've seen the Mages be able to leverage Sea Giants with mirror images and, you know, opposing Snip Snaps and Snip Snaps of their own to really make like huge token-based boards.
Right.
And it's really been a problem when it hasn't been, you know, the Water Rogue variety from Rogue coming up where they don't have Sea Giants of their own to at least be able to clap back against that. Where Seiko, both players are kind of playing this weird dance where they know they have a Sea Giant, they don't know that their opponent has a Sea Giant, so they're kind of both wandering towards the same position now.
Right.
But Seiko draws first blood, getting that Sea Giant down very cheap. Backstab to take care of the Sorcerer's Apprentice. Extremely powerful swing turn for Seiko.
Right, and now with that Frost Nova draw, Sea Giant on Hunterace's side costs 4 mana because it starts at 10 and there's 6 manas on the board. Sea Giant, of course, being the card on the far left, being a little shy, but he is there. And now Hunterace has a few options to stall, but what's his development options that are the best case in this scenario? Because if you do just freeze and you don't have any board development, it doesn't feel like you accomplished a game plan for Mage.
It's true. That Sea Giant has made his turn very, very awkward, which means he might have to divert to just a second Apprentice turn here. And by the way, that is almost always deliberate from a high-level player playing against Mage. Take notice of every time you see Sea Giant Frost Nova just be one-off being castable in a high-level game of Hearthstone. That's not an accident. Seiko has calculated that on his turn and pushed through a situation where he puts Hunterace in that exact spot.
Yeah, the only way that you can cheat out is through mirror images, and incidentally through your opponent's Snip Snap, but there's, you know, the Frostbolt's already been used.
Yep.
You know, Hunterace did have that chance if he had a Frostbolt. Sorcerer's Apprentice, Frostbolt, Sea Giant, Frost Nova, I think, might have been exactly the mana expenditure.
Well, no, you spent 3 at that point to only increase the minion size by 1? That doesn't work, does it? Ah, it doesn't matter.
You discount the Sea Giant by 3 as well, though. But you could be right as well. I might have miscounted there. Seiko, because the board was frozen and the Lackey stay on the board, just gets to play Hearthstone Grandmasters on 6. How important is that for this matchup, you think, Sottle?
It's huge. It can actually have a massive, massive impact because the Mage, kind of their essence, their ability, the thing that's kind of emblematic of their play is they can put huge things into play for very little mana, and they can kind of ignore what aggro decks are doing sometimes and just blow past them. And Wondrous Wand becomes a way to kind of mirror that effect yourself as the rogue, to do something equally powerful, equally cheaply to what the Mage is able to do, and kind of keep up pressure in the game past the point where Mage is able to do all the disgusting broken things that they're capable of.
Did you say mirror? Mirror image sets up the Sea Giant to be free because there will be 11 minions on the board. It does not give you negative mana or mana crystal back. But,
Sea Giant just gets an innovate built into it as well when you play it. Sign me up.
Oh man, that just sounds really crazy and quite impressive. This 5-mana Blizzard getting unnerved. Once upon a time, back in the beta, Blizzard did cost 5 mana. Frost Nova costed 2 mana. That was really crazy times back when Freeze Mage was unstoppable because Pyroblast also was 8. Seiko does not like the look of this. Wondrous Wand trying to pull some really big impact cards. 2 of them being very nice, backside being at least a decent tool to kill a minion, but of course discount pretty irrelevant.
This Spirit of the Shark makes the mother of all Edwin Van Cleefs this turn if he wants to go for it.
Does. It double dips into the Spirit of the Shark's double combo and battle cry, but it's a big target, and I mean, Hunterace could just stop with 1 Ray of Frost.
Right.
Meanwhile, these utility cards could end up being the saving grace, say if Seiko's able to even find a spell or a damage lackey that can help him in this spot.
Yeah, this makes sense. There's a lot of board objectives this turn. The Luna is potentially game-losing if it loses. The Sorcerer's Apprentice is game-losing if it loses. So he has 4 chances there just to hit 1 Kobold Lackey to get him out of that position. And you know what? Like, the Spirit of the Shark is still there next turn, right? Like, the Edwin Van Cleef will still be able to come down on the following turn, especially with all these lackeys backing it up.
Yeah, Hunterace is 1 more freeze away from glory as there's a full board from Seiko, so he cannot do anything next turn outside of Fan of Knives, or if he destroys his own minion with, or returns it with a Waggle pick. Right. Even then, nothing is guaranteed if you bounce back a minion that doesn't have impacts. How does Hunterace best navigate this turn? Is it just starting off with card draw? The card that he needs to draw are spells, so Book of Specters seems to be a card that he can't rely on right now.
It's fair. He can kind of create a scenario where he's happy to draw minions just by playing the Luna's Pocket Galaxy first, but it's a massive investment. He kind of just be relegated to trading down the board with the Sea Giant that he has at that point. I think he's much more interested in finding, like you say, a freeze effect that will allow him to be aggressive with his Sea Giant.
Yeah, and now because he picks up double Banana Buffoon, doesn't really have like the luxury of being able to ping very cleanly. So is he just going to trade on the board and try to stay alive? Looks like he is.
Yeah. Oh. You see he's not happy with the situation, but it's kind of the best way he had to bail out at that point. He drops the Sandbinder to pick up his Mountain Giant for the following turn, which gives him, of course, maximum options with that Conjurer's Calling in hand. Sea Giant Conjurer's Calling has really dropped off in terms of that kind of situation since the rush possibility was taken out of it. It's a huge ethereal lackey for Seiko. Shadow Step Vendetta.
Yeah, just powerful options non-stop here from Seiko. 5, 6, 10, 14. You know, Seiko was really close to potential lethal too, even with that, because the Spear of the Shark allowed him to Kobold Lackey twice over, so he had, you know, upwards of 14 to 19 damage if you landed perfectly on things.
Yeah, I wonder if he had... Whoa, okay, never mind. But I'm wondering whether he should have actually looked at a couple more RNG effects before he committed to not going for lethal. Like this, right, like Cold Blood, Eviscerate, etc., coming off the Lackey. Whether the Kobold Lackey itself was bounced from the Waggle Pick swing, potentially, like that can end up being an extra 4 damage, and then you have the Shadow Step alongside that as well. Like, there were definitely lethal outs that could have been examined that turn, I think, for Seiko. But, I mean, this looks fairly lethal from my perspective.
This is a 2-turn lethal if I've seen one as a setup. Almost everything across the board is a threat in its own right. You know, now Hunterace has that Ray of Frost, which probably would have been one of the cards that could have helped bail them out of that previous situation, maybe push through the damage. But now here's another problem, which is Hunterace, even if he develops into the board, doesn't exactly have anything guaranteed, given that Tyrion, just as a taunt, is still very annoying to deal with.
I see the lines, Frodan. It's ping, Fireball the Tyrion, Ashbringer overwrites the Waggle Pick, and it bounces the 22-22 off the board. And then you'd shit. No, it's a terrible play. But it would be funny.
It would be funny, and how much power is left over? 4,
a lot.
6, 9. Yeah, you still
you're still
dead
real
to
dead.
like a Leroy.
Yeah.
Gets the double Grave Horror though, and a frozen board. If sorry, part of the board gets frozen.
Yeah, 25% outer on the double taunts.
But Seiko has a handful of plays available to him with the Waggle Pick equipped, the Shadow Step in hand. Even the Vendetta is very nice here. It's a good pickup from the Ethereal Lackey. Just all the removal in the world here for Seiko.
Yep. So Vendetta, 4 goes in. Cold Blood for 6, 7, 8. Yeah, he's not pushing lethal, I don't think, just with the resources that he has available at the moment. Trading a Snip Snap first to minimize board state. It's very likely that's deliberate because he has board state problems this turn.
Yep, just for reference, that was the time where Snip Snap died. It was played on turn 2.
Yeah, no, that is a very good point. That is a very good point.
Cold Blood just used to potentially trade, but not before he gets to, once again, double dip on the Evil Miscreant. Oh, or does he have to?
Lethal outs again.
Potential
lethal outs again.
Right here.
Yep.
Just has to land on the Kobold Lackey.
No, he's good. He just needs space on the board, and then Kobold Lackey.
Oh,
as long as the Shark doesn't bounce, he's good. Boom. Game 1, Seiko. The power of Kobold Lackey's just forcing through all of that damage that he needed. Hunterace just kind of ran out of defensive options, and I think you could see from his facial expressions the turn he knew when that was slipping away from him. It was that turn that we discussed that was very awkward. He ended up just having to set up for that Mountain Giant Conjurer's Calling on the following turn. And Seiko just recognized it, alphaed at the right time. 22-22, Edwin on board. Yeah, okay, he got a Tyrion, but it just wasn't relevant in the situation. It didn't matter. It could have been any 8-drop, and just had so much pressure it got over the line.
Right, and the challenge for Hunterace, too, was, you know, even if he got himself out of that situation cleaner, what was his ultimate game plan to win? It felt like he was in that position where he had to freeze the board and answer it, but he didn't really have the win conditions set up for himself. He had Antonidas, but even if he had Antonidas and Frost Nova, which is many to be considered to be the ultimate turn 10 play against a big board, what was his game plan afterwards? Because his opponent still had 24 life,
right? And
he would have just died on the following
Yeah, he did have that Luna's Pocket Galaxy in his hand for a couple of turns, but, you know, that's kind of how you beat Luna's Pocket Galaxy is what Seiko did. Keep up the pressure so high that your opponent can't allocate 5 to playing that Luna's Pocket Galaxy, and then you never have to worry about it. And there was one turn where, like, he could have ripped it, and if he got the ultimate high roll of, like, 0-mana minion plus Frost Nova off his Arcane Intellect afterwards, like, maybe he was in the game. That's a ridiculously small outer. He maybe considered it, but in the end, I think his line was probably more consistent, but he was in a very unfavorable comfortable position regardless.
And now we get to enter the phase of Specialists as a format where we get to see players adapt based off their preparation. Both players bring a secondary and tertiary deck. In this position, Seiko has chose to bring a secondary deck that has Betrayal, Eviscerate, Fairy Dragons, and Walk the Planks. We've seen some rogues even skirt this a little bit by playing, say, a Fairy Dragon in their primary deck so they can squeeze in, say, a second Betrayal or a second Walk the Plank.
Right.
And get a little bit more removal options. This is the choice that you have to make by exchanging 5 cards from your primary. However, I do like that Seiko says, you know what, I'm just going to stick to a very powerful core deck. We've seen, the Fairy Dragons in the primary just sometimes didn't do anything really. So in the end, I still think it's good enough. Even though you might get a few more percentage points by having the second copy.
And for sure, and just to contextualize that first game even more, that makes it all the more huge a win for Seiko, because he's come into this in a position where he's ready to tech for Mage. He's almost in a position where, like, all right, game 1 is a free roll, and then I bring in my heavy hitters in game 2 and 3 with my secondary deck, but he actually picked up the win in that first game anyway. So now he has those huge techs to come in against Hunterace.
Yep, and then Hunterace, I believe, is switching to his tertiary deck, although you have up to 5 cards that you can switch. Hunterace has opted for only 2, removing Archmage, Antonidas, and Banana Buffoon in favor of 2 halftime scavengers. This is a card from Rastakan's Rumble that says Stealth, Overkill, gain 3 armor. The Stealth, of course, being one of the most crucial aspects of this halftime scavenger, giving it the option to trade when it wants to. This is in contrast to, say, another 4-mana Stealth option in the Coppertail Imposter, which only has Stealth for 1 turn, which probably is the reason why I'm not as hype on that card as a lot of other people. I always feel like the Stealth aspect of it, giving you the option to magnetize and whatnot, makes it feel like you have to have the Wargear immediately, otherwise it's in danger of dying.
Yeah, I agree entirely with that assessment. I do like the way that Hunterace has put this together, though, the more I look at it, with the 2 Frostbolts in the core deck to begin with. I think Frostbolt is one of the most effective cards you can have against Rogue, probably just behind that halftime scavenger, and it's just a solid card that you can carry in your main deck to begin with. So it makes sense to me the way Hunterace has built it, but like you said, that stealth aspect of the halftime scavenger is so huge because it kind of counterplays how Rogue have built their deck, which is they play early pressure with Fairy Dragons or whatever else, and then because you're under so much pressure, you have to play a minion early. You feel like you have to, drop a giant on 4 or whatever if you have it, but then they have the Walk the Plank or the Vendetta combo or whatever it is to remove that giant and kind of steal away all your initiative with Conjurer's Calling potential. So the stealth minion with halftime scavenger is what makes that so crucial.
I am very intrigued by this Van Cleef keep on the play. I've seen a lot of people keep Van Cleef almost ubiquitously across the board when you have the coin, but with when you're going first, you have less cards. You obviously don't have the coin. But it's interesting that Seiko prioritizes that. And I mean, there's a theory behind it. Like, Van Cleef is just often one of your best cards in Rogue, period. Do you think specifically in this matchup it's really crucial to have?
I'm actually a little surprised by it too, to be honest. I think, he's put Fairy Dragons and so on in his deck. I think I would personally be mulliganing a bit more aggressively for those cards to get the pressure rolling. He does pick up the Backstab to go along with it, and now a Vendetta as well, which could be discounted to 0 in the near future. It looks like he might get paid out for it if he finds a Burgle card off the top in the near future.
Yeah, and Hunterace, if he plays a 2-health minion early, can get punished, but this is not that kind of matchup. Usually play like the Sorcerer's Apprentice early if you feel like your opponent's going to rush you down, or you need to get that tempo preemptively and you can't get punished by it. Like Warriors, for example, don't have many options on 3 to remove the Sorcerer's Apprentice, and that gives you an option to really burst them down early with some powerful plays.
Right.
That being said, I've had my fair share of testing this matchup, specifically against Admirable, and I played Sorcerer's Apprentice on 2 a lot, and that ended up helping me win the matchup, but it was a little bit of a more aggressively teched Rogue deck with like more Eviscerates, for example.
Okay. So Hunterace has a decent little collection of things that he wants in the matchup. He does have double halftime scavenger. The Banana Buffoon can be weak in the matchup. There's a reason why it's one of the cards that does bite the dust for those halftime scavengers. The second copy of Banana Buffoon is usually going out alongside the Archmage Antonidas. But the rest of his hand is looking pretty solid just in terms of being able to fight for tempo, quite honestly, quite unmage-like in the way that he'll try and fight off the tempo from Seiko.
Yeah, the danger of playing the Banana Buffoon is also enabling Seiko's combos. If he has, say, Evil Miscreant kept in the opening hand, now he has a way to enable it.
Or
by
if he has-
backstabbing it.
Yeah, or if he has backstab Edwin, shadow step Edwin, for example.
Yeah, that sounds really heavy. I mean, that's what, 8/8 Edwin?
Yep.
Although, if your opponent just keeps it on one Ray of Frost per turn, it feels like you invested so many cards and you're stuck hoping that the top of your deck is going to be good.
He's considering Shadow Step later on for different outs, but also the potential that Spirit of the Shark in the hand offers as well to make Edwin bigger later on.
I don't mind that either. You get 4 damage plus the follow-up.
Yep.
That does give Hunterace a little bit more breathing room, though.
Yeah, that's the reason that I would kind of argue against this play. I definitely see his line, and he could probably convince me, but to me, that halftime scavenger on 4 is quite an important aspect of the way this mage deck is built. So if you made it an 8/8 immediately, you could stop that coming down. You'd force the Ray of Frost right off the bat.
Fair enough. But now it's 10-10. And this game could end very quickly if Hunterace doesn't find ways to deal with this 10-10.
Yeah.
He does have Frostbolts, I believe, on the far left. And the moment he picks up Conjurer's Calling is another opportunity for him to shut down this 10-10.
Yeah, it doesn't often pay out too huge. It's never a play you're happy to make when you have to Conjurer's Calling your Edwin, because you know they're still getting like 6/6 of stats on the other side of the board after you Conjurer's Calling a lot of the time.
Yeah, hopefully the halftime scavenger can help Hunterace clean up that. But for now, Seiko doing an excellent job putting him in an uncomfortable spot, given that his hand was a little bit awkward, right? It was like a full costed Vendetta. It was a backside with no targets, and now Seiko's launched a very relevant offensive that can just end the series within the next couple of turns. Three Mountain Giant.
Runs out on
Very vulnerable to a walk the plank scenario.
It is.
What to do?
So I wonder if we'll see Hunterace extend further. Of course, he can pair the Frostbolt with this, which I think he's forced to do. There's potential to use coin to get Sorcerer's Apprentice down in the same position, just to have a little more board presence in the case of a walk the plank coming down.
Right.
With the Blink Fox, he can SI Vendetta and hold on to his walk the plank for future and still deal with this Mountain Giant.
Right. The Spirit of the Shark coming in huge again.
This guy's tough.
And this is a really important thing to learn as well, is that just because you have the perfect removal for a situation doesn't mean you have to just go and jam it. That walk the plank is like universally flexible. It will almost always kill a huge minion. You are not always going to get to use SI7 agent to kill a huge minion. So using the kind of difficult to use options now and having the universal option for later is quite often a more powerful way of doing it.
Yes. And, you know, speaking of universal options here, Ray of Frost, one of the most flexible cards in Mage, and now Hunterace has options to utilize Banana and Ray of Frost. Even can throw in a Ziliax, should he want to clear off even more of the board. I don't know if that's absolutely crucial in this position, given that he is going to have a little bit of armor. He can even develop the second halftime scavenger, which I'm probably in favor of right now.
Yeah, second scavenger seems like the right way to go about it. There were various ways that he could look at actually just killing the Edwin outright this turn, but I think it just concedes too much tempo in order to do that.
Yeah, and you know what? Hunterace just wants to stall because there's a lot of cards being used by Seiko to develop, and he also lost one of his best cards to refill his hand in the Spear of the Shark.
Right.
And, you know, Seiko's hand is actually looking fairly awkward. He picked up Jan'alai, which does not synergize with the Rogue hero power, contrary to what you might think at first glance. Like, oh, I've attacked 8 times in this game.
It's a travesty, honestly.
It kind of is, although, you know, I feel like it really doesn't make much sense if you think about it.
No, it absolutely is correct the way it works right now, but, you know, it doesn't mean a man can't dream.
Yeah.
To be fair, I guess Rogue has enough privilege right now. It doesn't need more. It's fine. It's fine.
So then, you know, Seiko really would not want to use Walk the Plank in this position. However, do you think he's forced to make sure that the game isn't out of reach because of the halftime scavenger being buffed?
I feel like it, yeah, it does kind of lead back to that position I was talking about before, where he's kind of given himself the freedom, right? If he'd have gone the other way around, gone Walk the Plank on the previous turn, he would have developed less pressure, and he would have been in a position with his Spirit of the Shark dead, where he'd be really struggling to deal with a 4/6. So even though the Vendetta ended up killing a smaller minion, you can kind of see the payout for Seiko in that position.
Well, Hunterace has a bunch of cheap spells and a Sorcerer's Apprentice. Magic Trick could pull up some big plays here. Nice Conjure's Calling. And he's a Khadgar.
Yep. As I mentioned, that is a 15% out. He finds it.
Right. I mean, there was other good options too for Hunterace, but Conjure's Calling
That was
probably the best.
That is above and beyond the other options, though, for sure.
Yeah, HS Replay, I believe, put out an infographic one time to show the best Magic Trick cards that you could discover, and Conjure's Calling was by far the most dominant card. And surprisingly, some cards that have higher impact that you might think, like Frostbolt, wasn't actually that good.
Really?
It was. I think it was interesting, you know, and it could be the fact that, you know, people will play Magic Trick as desperation as opposed to what they need to do. But Conjure's Calling, just to show you, is absolutely ridiculous with the amount of tempo that you can get. He gets Steel Rager, which allows him to trade immediately onto the board. And it's going to go once more with another Conjure's Calling. He gets Houndmaster Shaw, is that right?
He must have, yeah. Yeah.
Wow!
Yes, Casper, yes, I know.
And Archmage Vargoth!
What is happening?
Hunterace can't even believe what's happening right now.
Magic Trick, Ray of Frost? Okay,
well,
Ray of Frost.
Well,
all right. And then
has another one? He gets a banana.
Okay. All right, calm down. Everything's fine. Don't worry. The world hasn't ended. We're good.
You sure?
Yes.
10, 12, 18, 19 damage showing.
Dude, that's so many unlikely things off two Conjurer's Calling. There's only like 6 rush minions to begin with of 4-drop, and then he hits one of those, and then he gets like 2 of the absolute best like special effect 4-drops that you can get off Conjurer's Calling right after that as well.
Dude, he can play Arcane Intellect and draw 4 cards next turn. At least, right? Because he draws the 5th off the top. That's crazy.
Well, he has 2 Vargoths. So if he like...
Sorry, 4 additional cards.
Right, yeah. So if he just rips the Arcane Intellect and then just plays minions, he's drawing 6 that turn.
If he has board space for it.
Yeah.
I mean, good on Seiko to try and remain calm, but this is anything but a calm scenario for him.
Yeah, obviously we're excited about it, but you got to give some sympathy over to the man who is 1 game away from a position where he's fighting for a spot at BlizzCon against Fino, and then that outcome hits you in the face. Like, your heart has to go out to that man in this position, as much as we love to see it just to see cool stuff happen.
And now Hunterace is going to refill his hand. Yep. Develop the Ziliax because he sees that Seiko's taking an aggressive stance.
And his Ziliax has Rush because of the Houndmaster shot.
Oh, that's just broken. Ziliax with Rush? Get out of here! Ziliax had Rush. I'd put it in all my decks.
Yeah, you'd play it in like every class. It'd just be the best 5-drop.
Houndmaster Shaw, you know, just one of those cards that needs to be killed immediately along with Vargoth. In fact, we're seeing like the entire arsenal of 4-mana minions that need to be dealt with immediately. Outside of like Necro Mechanic for Hunter. Look at the absurdity! He just draws all of his good cards.
I feel like with each passing day, like we keep seeing more Mage against Rogue. It's one of the most common matchups in Specialists in Grandmasters. And I feel like on each passing day, the current day says hold my beer to the previous day. Like they just have to outdo the ridiculousness that we see out of this matchup. There's so much random outcomes out of the Conjurer's Calling, so much created by stuff that comes from you know, the Rogue Burgle package, that it really does open things up. And honestly, I personally think it's a very good thing because we have seen a lot of this matchup in Grandmasters, and I have not got bored of seeing it yet because no 2 games are the same. They are all each their own little special snowflake of a game because of all the different routes it can go.
Yeah, I think that if you look at it contextualized in that game, it just looks like a blowout victory. But I'm pretty sure that Hunterace was super far ahead, even to the point where if the game probably would have gone a couple more turns for Seiko had he not gotten all those rush minions, because then he became basically Dr. Boom at that point.
Right.
But, you know, Seiko just wasn't giving him a chance to have a comeback. It went from like a 90% chance, 95% chance for Hunterace to win to like 110%. Like Seiko should have just conceded there because he had no chance of coming back against a Vargoth that'd be able to draw all those cards and, you know, Houndmaster Shaw, which turns him into Dr. Boom Mad Genius. It was ridiculous.
Yeah.
Absolutely ridiculous scenario.
I'm not sure if I'd go as far as 90 because before the first Conjurer's Calling came down, Seiko still had some semblance of a board that was fighting, so he could have challenged some like 3/3s and 4/4s or whatever come off 4-drops. as soon as like the Steel Rager appears and then starts
Okay,
trading
that's
out
fair.
his board, and then after that, because the Steel Rager's already rushed, and then because the other minions rush because of the Houndmaster Shore, he has no board to fight with anymore, and that kind of ends the game. So I do think it had an impact for sure, but you know, sometimes that just happens.
I just haven't seen mages really lose games where they're able to successfully land a trade with the halftime scavenger and then
Yes.
Khadgar and Conjur's Calling.
Yeah.
It's just too much stats to
Right,
deal with.
right.
It's as if he's developing 2 more giants behind it.
Yeah, I think the one kicker for Seiko in that position, he would be looking up at Hunterace's hand and saying, okay, 2 cards, 3 cards, whatever it was.
Right, that's fair. That's
Maybe I can fight back against this if I just go piece by piece and pick this apart.
It's true.
Then the Arcane Intellect's like, geez, come on, man. Like, give the boy a break. You're going to Arcane Intellect for 6 cards?
Yeah, 3 mana, just Myras.
Yeah, pretty much.
And now Hunterace, he's on the play this time. Thinking very hard about this opening hand, which, you know, Frostbolt being a very useful card, Stargazer Luna being a pretty good card to develop on 3 and challenging Rogue. Seiko only keeping Backstab to make sure that he can enable his combos, but he's going to be really looking forward to some of those other cards that he teched into the matchup.
Yeah, I think also when going second, weirdly, Backstab is a good card to keep as Rogue. You do have the coin as a combo activator, so some players might look at a mulligan like that and say, well, I don't really need Backstab. The problem is the mage's strategy against you when they're going first is going to be just develop minions and curve out a lot of the time. So if they're playing early Sorcerer's Apprentice, if they're playing early Mana Cyclones, the ability to just stop that tempo right in its tracks is super crucial, which actually weirdly makes Backstab perhaps even more effective on coin. Yep.
This is game 3. It's all the marbles on the line. When we go to the finals, it'll be transitioned to a best of 5. Seiko with the proactive SI7 agent to the face. I've seen this play a lot in 2014, back when Rogue was playing ridiculous stuff like Sinister Strikes and Arcane Golems to try and kill you by turn 5.
Right.
People often call that the backspace Rogue back in the day.
Yep.
And now Hunterace, he was thinking about, like, you know what, maybe Luna's on 3 is fine, but is it okay in this position? You know, and you can see how much
What to
Seiko
do?
values stopping a
do?
Stargaze Luna being dropped on 3.
Well, so this is actually a really interesting spot because part of the reason Seiko does this is that it's just his curve, right? His curve goes 3 into 3 into 4, like every single time. He almost never gets forced off that. So if he's going to do that, he might as well just activate the SI combo because the Blink
I
Fox doesn't
wonder.
need a combo, right? It's just kind of strictly better to do it that way around. So actually, if Hunterace develops a read off that, he can actually flip the situation on its head and play Stargazer Luna exactly to force Seiko off of his 3 into 3 curve. So kind of instead of Seiko forcing Hunterace off the Stargazer Luna, Hunterace is sacrificing his Stargazer Luna to try and force Seiko off the 3 into 3 curve, and then Seiko just doesn't bite. He just says, you know what, I have the Vendetta. Unlucky.
Exactly. Seiko was prepared for that situation both ways. It was very nice.
As long as it keeps out arrows.
And now Hunterace is staring at 6 damage with a lot more on the way. Seiko's
Yep.
picking up a fairly aggressive hand, even though it looks like it's value-driven. Book of Specters. Master's Call. There's no way, right?
Cable Rat, Life Shrink. Let's go.
Yeah, I mean, Blink Fox is also an opportunity, too.
That's true.
Hunterace has the Sorcerer's Apprentice. So some plays available here to Hunterace. Although I think the #1 thing he wanted to do was find a way to dip into the armor pool that Halftime Scavenger would give him.
You can do that anyway, just with the ping, right?
Right.
What
Ping,
to
Conjur's
do?
Calling.
Yep.
What to do?
I don't really see the need to generate something else. Hope from Hunterace's reaction there that he's not just run into some technical issues. Does appear like his mouse cursor is frozen. Okay, he's good.
Violet Teacher. And Spear the Shark?
Whoa.
Am I reading that correctly?
Yep,
Is
a chuck.
But
Runs out on me.
is that good for Hunterace? He doesn't have any combo cards, obviously. And the Battlecry minions, he has Mana Cyclone,
Yep.
Banana Buffoon,
Yep.
and that's it.
Sandbinder?
Nope, he took.
He doesn't play?
Oh, no, he does play Sandbinder. You're right. That was the secondary deck. He removed Sandbinder. That's actually not that good. But it is a stealth minion, which means that Hunterace can have a guaranteed Conjure's Calling target number 2.
Yeah, that is a good point, actually. That's
So if he picks up Khadgar, that ends up becoming a pretty good situation for him. Because Seiko was prepared, right? He had backstab and other things. All right, well.
yeah, it's a play your hand kind of turn.
Icicle, Astral Rift. Looks like Hunterace is going to draw more cards here.
Arcane Intellect, look for the Cyclone, because as we mentioned, Cyclone is one of the nut draws here with Spirit and the Shark on the board. Doesn't find it.
He still can, though, with Frost Nova and Icicle. But I think he'd rather prioritize the Conjure's Calling.
Get to Conjurer's Call, yeah.
And it's a tough spot because Hunterace knows that if he doesn't deal with the board, he could actually just die.
Right.
There's 10 power showing. And if Seiko lands like Life Drinker, and he wins. It would have to be Frost Nova Icicle into exactly Mana Cyclone. And then he would have to have a bunch more spells. If he plays the Conjurer's Calling...
Yeah, and then he needs like Ray of Frost and Frost Bolts off of his Mana Cyclone after he hits it.
Right.
Yikes. Okay.
Sturdy minions, but... Oh my goodness, that is the 16th point of damage. Seiko is going to close this out. Mage can't handle the pressure. And world champion Hunterace with another deep run, but gets stopped here in the semifinals. Seiko is going to advance to play Fina.
Fantastic performance. Probably the one name out of these 4 players who made it to the semifinals that the casual viewer would be least familiar with, but he is an absolute killer. Despite his quiet demeanor, you know, he is the brainchild behind a lot of players' success recently, particularly from the German scene, who have reached the upper echelons of competition, and then specifically called out Seiko as being a practice partner, you know, a player who was in the lab for them, cooking up ideas and building deck lists and practicing with them extensively. And it's great now to see him in this kind of position where he can really put himself out there and get some shine on himself.
Yeah, Seiko is a player that I think has the least fanfare given the least amount of spotlight, right? And he's a fairly humble player, just does not want to put himself out there too often in terms of just being in front of the camera, but no one really doubts his skills. And I think the fact that he finished second in points while he still was trying to threaten Hunterace's position last year is a testament to that, exactly. And Seiko now advances to play against Fino, and once more keeping up the very interesting battle back and forth between Rogue versus Mage. Seems like no Mage mirrors or Rogue mirrors are allowed here
no.
in the Euro playoffs. It's only Mage versus Rogue, exactly that.
There you see it, Seiko going on to take Fino. Fino won our first series of the day, taking it over good friend and practice partner and, of course, teammate on T1 in terms of Orange. And you saw how much it kind of meant to Orange at the end there. Like, he did not want a camera in his face anymore. As soon as the lethal draw was made, he was just kind of out of there. And you can see what this means to those players because of that reaction. You saw a very similar thing from Hunterace, but I think, you know, on a little bit of reflection, they will hopefully come to understand that they put in a fantastic performance. Yeah. You know, they've consolidated the existing fan base that both of them have. They'll both be very, very proud of their performances. And I'm sure they'll both be back bigger and stronger for Season 2. That's enough living in the past and the future, because we have got Fino versus Seiko coming up to round it all out.
Yeah, that's right. And these are 2 players who haven't gone to a world championship yet. Orange and Hunterace both have been to one apiece. Hunterace, of course, won the first championship that he appeared in, which is you know, an excellent stat. And you know what? It's okay, because Hunterace, even though he lost, it just means that he'll come back hungrier for Season 2. And I know that it's a nice fire that's lit under him, because we've seen a lot of players, when they qualify really early in like the competitive year, they kind of take it a little bit easier. I want to see him continue to fuel forward. In the meantime, for Seiko and Fino, how big is it for both these players? Neither of them been to the World Championship, but they've been close on both ends. It's a really important matchup, obviously, for that reason, but it's cool to see some new blood as well.
Yeah, it's huge, and it goes to show that kind of the HCT point standings from the previous year were one of the real proving grounds as to who is a consistent top player. because, you know, of course it's the pinnacle. The Hearthstone World Championship is the very peak of the mountain, but it is also just one tournament. And just because you didn't qualify for that one tournament does not mean that you're not one of the best players in the world, especially if you've gone through the entire year and sat at the top of the point standings like both Fino and Seiko were able to do. The idea that anyone was able to get within touching distance of what Hunterace did last year, like, is kind of absurd. And both of those players did, and they're now both sat in finals. And final shout out just on the Seiko Hunterace saga. Seiko becomes the first player to beat Hunterace in a number of weeks in this tournament, because
that's right.
Hunterace absolutely just ran the field through the second rotation of the round robin, beat all 7 players in quick succession, which is how he ended up taking down the first seed in the group. So he would have been riding that momentum, and like you said, it might be that defeat now to Seiko that lights that fire under him again for Season 2.
That's right, and it also turns into a best of 5. So we'll see how things continue to evolve, but that does it for us on the desk for this second semifinal. When we come back, Adam will be joining the desk to wrap up the Europe first season here of Grandmasters. So don't go anywhere. HSL will be right back right after this.